want to do something a little bit different with you this morning to honor Canada Day, because it's not usual that Canada Day falls on a Sunday. And this is a very much abbreviated version of a PowerPoint presentation by Dr. Gary Boucher, who is a pastor in a small town just outside Ottawa, Trinity Bible Church it's called. And it goes back a few years. It's called Canada's Spiritual Heritage. And I hope you find this interesting as we look at the spiritual foundations of our country and then resolve to continue to underpin our country with prayer so that we may once again be a truly Christian nation, a spiritual nation at the very least. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. That's a quote from Psalm 33. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the Lord revere him. For he spoke and it came to be. He commanded and it stood firm. The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he chose for his inheritance. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. And that's our purpose. We want Canada to continue to be a blessed country. Canada is really a nation of nations, beginning, of course, with the First Nations who were here before Europeans ever arrived, Indians, Inuit, later French, the Métis, English, and now, especially since World War II, people from virtually every other nation in the world have come to Canada. But the early European explorers brought Christianity with them, and it was their intent to introduce Christianity to the First Nations so that this land that they were discovering would be an exclusively Christian nation. Of course, that was true especially up till about 25 years ago, but as you know, as it happened all over the Western world, we've seen increasing secularization. We've been losing touch with our Christian heritage. But I thought I'd take you in a brief overview of history this morning and look at some of the Christian roots of our country. In the beginning, people came to this country to escape crippling poverty and or the religious persecution that they were experiencing in Europe and to begin a new life here. That's especially true of our family and my wife's family. I'm a third-generation Canadian. My grandparents emigrated from England on both sides, father and mother, to discover a new and better life than they had here in England. My wife is a fifth-generation Canadian, and her forebears were British and Irish, and they came to the Ottawa Valley. My ancestors came to Montreal, so we're Montrealers. But if you look at Leif Erikson, who was probably the first European to set foot in North America around 1000 AD, and he landed in Lance Meadow in Newfoundland, which is actually the northern tip of Newfoundland. He'd been converted to Christianity in Norway and was sent by King Olaf, the king of Norway, via Greenland, primarily to spread the Christian faith to wherever he came. So he was first and foremost a missionary. And did you know that Newfoundland's motto is "Seek first the kingdom of God"? Fantastic motto for a province. And that's a view of Lance Meadow. The next main explorer was actually an Italian, Giovanni Caboto, who came to Bonavista, Newfoundland, and he was commissioned actually by King Henry VII of England to discover a passage to the Orient, but he found North America instead. But the important thing to remember is that he was not only an explorer and a merchant, but he was also a missionary. And wherever he went, he claimed the land for God as well as for England. But he gave the first place to God. Then came Jacques Cartier. And Jacques Cartier in 1534, he landed on what's now known as Gaspé, the Gaspé Peninsula in Quebec. And a few years ago, Cheryl and I visited where he landed, and there's still a cross there today. First thing he did when he landed was to plant a cross, claim this for the kingdom of God. And there's still a cross there today. Canada, as you probably are aware, stems from the root Huron word, Kanata, which means a village or community. And it was a sense, the early settlers were very much helped by the First Nations who were here, especially helping them to survive in the harsh climate that they had never experienced before. And they felt that they were called by God to claim the land, but also to be a multicultural nation, sharing their faith with those who are here already. It was never the intent of the explorers to exploit the First Nations who were here. In 1578, Martin Frobisher was sent to try and discover the Northwest Passage through the Canadian Arctic. And on his ship, the Anne Francis, there was the first service led by his chaplain of a communion and a service of thanksgiving here in the New World that at least is being recorded. So, and he was probably an Anglican pastor. Then the next person we come across was Samuel de Champlain. He was the founder of Quebec City, the father of New France. And he traveled to the interior of North America. He was the son of a Huguenot, which is a French Protestant mother, and a Roman Catholic father, and was the first known explorer to travel with Catholic and Protestant members of his crew. And he was truly multinational. He, as I said, he saw the natives that he encountered not as savages, but as people with whom he could share the gospel. Jean de Brébeuf, very significant person in Canadian history, Canadian religious history. How many of you have visited Ste. Marie among the Hurons, which is up near Midland? I encourage you to do that. We've been a couple of times. It's a very impressive historical site. They completely rebuilt the fort that was there and the Indian village, and it's a real insight into the Christian heritage of Canada. Jean de Brébeuf was a Jesuit priest who came as a missionary to work among the Hurons. He learned their language and prepared a Huron-French dictionary. He was very culturally sensitive, and he prepared a list of 15 things that one must do when ministering among the Hurons, must do and not do, to be sensitive to their heritage and culture. And every Christmas, or most Christmases, we sing the carol that he composed, known as the Huron Carol. It was the first truly North American hymn, and it was written originally in the Huron language. 'Twas in the moon of wintertime when all the earth was still. You know that, when mighty Gitche Manitou. That was the first Canadian carol, if you will, written by Jean de Brébeuf. But of course, he was savagely martyred some years later. And what's interesting is wherever there's missionary activity, martyrdom is common among missionaries. I'm thinking of the missionaries in Uganda, in Africa. It's said that the church in Uganda was founded on the blood of the martyrs, and that was certainly true in Canada. And after Jean de Brébeuf and his companions were martyred, there's record of hundreds of conversions to Christ afterwards. I'm a Montrealer, and the founder of Montreal was Paul Chamedy, the Sieur de Maisonneuve, and he was a very devout man. In the early days, Montreal, built right down on the shores of the St. Lawrence, was subject to flooding, and one year the city was threatened especially severely by a spring flood, and he gathered the whole community together, and they had a prayer vigil praying that the waters wouldn't advance any further, and they didn't. And in gratefulness, de Maisonneuve and his followers he carried across on his back to imitate Christ, and he carried it from the shores of the St. Lawrence, would have been about 2 or 3 miles, up to the pinnacle of Mount Royal. And there's still a cross overlooking Mount Royal today. And it's there. We Christians continue to pray for it and bless it, that it may be a sign of the spiritual heritage of that city. 2 other significant people. One thing we have to remember is that missionaries not only came to convert, but they brought with them a passion for the welfare of the people. And 2 significant people in Quebec were Jeanne Mance. In fact, when I was a student, I lived on Jeanne Mance Street, and Jeanne Mance opened the first hospital in North America, the Hotel Dieu Hospital in Montreal. It's still there today. In fact, the original building is still there, not far from where I used to live in Montreal. And Marguerite Bourgeois, another Roman Catholic nun, opened schools and was the founder of a Christian school system in Quebec. Frontenac, Louis de Bode Frontenac, in 1672, was a French Protestant. He was a Huguenot, and he was made the first governor of Canada. And at the opening of the first assembly in Canada, he declared that he was committing himself and his life, if necessary, to extending the kingdom of Christ in this country. And he opened the way for many churches. It was Frontenac who encouraged Anglicans, Presbyterians, Lutherans, and Congregationalists to move into Canada in force and to plant churches wherever they could. And then there are people like Henry Alline, who ministered in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick during the Great Awakening, and the Moravians sent missionaries to Canada. The Moravians came to Labrador, the eastern part of province of Quebec, to reach the Inuit. And do you know that it was primarily Anglican missionaries who brought the gospel to the Inuit in northern Canada? And so you'll find that most of the Inuit today are very strong Anglicans or Pentecostals or Roman Catholics, but Christianity is woven deep into their culture. In the 1980s, I was a supervisor for a student at Diocesan College in Montreal. He was preparing for the ministry, and Chris Trott had been an anthropologist, and he'd gone up to Cape Dorset on Baffin Island to study Inuit culture. And while he was there, he traveled with some of the Inuit hunters out on their hunting trips, and he was so impressed by their natural Christian faith that he was converted by the Inuit. He was a non-believer, but every morning, the first thing they did before they ever left their tents or igloos, whatever they were in, the elder would gather the hunters around, and they would say morning prayer, Anglican morning prayer together before they ever went out. And that so impressed him that he was brought to the Lord. It started a questioning process. It was an amazing story. I wish he could be here to tell you himself. He shared it with our church, and it was very exciting to see reverse evangelism.